Hey guys, welcome back. We've got a couple guests here with us today. We have Drew and Jose. Say what's up.
Self high five. That was Drew. Hey,
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Drew really wanted to have his own intro music and pyro and all kinds of things, but we're a pretty low budget podcast, and the best we could do is him imitating DDP. So, Drew, by all means, go ahead and introduce your own style, your own brand.
I'm not getting the push here that I deserve, so I'm gonna try to get into AEW or something.
Oh,
This
sounds like we got a little bit of a heel in the room.
this feels like ECW circa '98.
Oh, I don't know if he's that hardcore. He kind of sounds like a new age millennial.
Well, no, I mean by the budget wise.
Oh, us? Yeah, well, we're way underfunded. Paul
We're-
Heyman definitely would represent us in the 90s.
Yeah, we're some backyard in, I don't know, Mississippi or somewhere. No one's coming to our events.
But the reason that we brought these two personalities on with us this week is because we wanted to talk a little bit about wrestling. And Drew and Jose are two longtime fans of the sport of wrestling and have watched it all throughout the 90s. And we wanted to specifically talk about the Monday Night Wars, the greatest era of wrestling, in my opinion. And that's whenever I was the most hooked and whenever I would be the most amped to go to school and talk to all my friends about it. So that's kind of what we're going to do now, except we're not sitting around the cafeteria school eating shitty food. We're sitting around computer screens talking as adults. Either way, it's a win. And we devised a little bit of a tournament to kind of guide us through our conversation as to who was the most impactful during the Monday Night Wars. And I think every single person that voted and contributed to the polls and all that stuff that helped seed the bracket. And without any further ado, I'm ready to reveal the top 10 to our panel and to the world. At number 10, Chris Jericho. At number 9, Bret Hart. Number 8, Sting. 7, Mick Foley. 6, Shawn Michaels. 5, The Undertaker. 4, Hulk Hogan. 3, Ric Flair. 2, The Rock. And 1, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I don't remember exactly where each of you voted, but how did that kind of fall as to where you rank them? Jose, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Number one, definitely Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was the biggest mover of that era, and he arguably became the biggest star from that era. But with that said, him being at number one, I do want to give an honorable mention to Vince McMahon because the Mr. McMahon character is what propelled that rivalry, which in turn just propelled WWF to, beat Nitro after 83 weeks and then just eliminate them in the long run.
Yeah, I agree completely. Without the Mr. McMahon character, Stone Cold probably wouldn't have been as important to that time. And don't worry, we're going to get to an honorable mention section before we wrap up because there were way too many awesome people to only talk about 10. But Drew, how does that fall for you?
Well, there's one glaring error that I think I can pick out from how these stupid idiots must have been voting, and that's Chris Jericho. I had at number 1. So take that 0 right off of there.
Yeah, so
That's closer to what I had.
So you think Chris Jericho is the number one, the best of all time? Well, in the
I didn't say the best. Well, I do.
In this bracket, when
he is my favorite wrestler. I'll just go ahead and disclose that to everyone. So yeah, I would say that in the Monday Night Wars, he's hence my number one from that era. This is the time when he was first really not not necessarily. I don't know how far the Monday Night Wars era spans, I guess, but I know that around this time is when he was first kind of gaining popularity and breaking out. Really,
I think of Chris Jericho more as like an Attitude Era guy.
No. I definitely think of him as a Monday Night War guy.
he was definitely around. He was WCW, I think, in the time period that. I mean,
he was one of the first to
if we
jump
could-
ships to
right? Yeah,
to
he,
start that transition to WCW being the sinking ship that it became.
He definitely benefited the most out of the entire group that jumped from WCW to WWF at the time. And I see him more as the Ruthless Aggression era because he did make an impact on his debut, had the big pyro, the countdown,
yeah, Y2J.
started his promo off with The Rock, one of the top guys right there, and held his own. But his career really propelled as the early 2000s came into play. And by that time, they had jumped from Attitude Era over to Ruthless Aggression Era.
Okay. You kind of lost me on that one a little bit because whenever he came over to The Rock, that was his first night on the show, and that was definitely still in the middle of this whole topic of what we're talking about, the Monday Night Wars. So jumping around from era to era in WWE doesn't matter. It was still within the Monday Night Wars that he was making a huge fucking impact. But let's get to the bracket. We we've talked a little bit about Chris Jericho already, and we'll start with him since he was number 10 on our seed, battling against Mick Foley. Now, Zach, out of these two, Mick Foley, Chris Jericho, how do you see them as their importance to the Monday Night era? And go ahead and cast your vote, and then we'll rotate it around from Zach to Jose to Drew, and then I'll wrap it up and go to the next one.
Cool. For me, I think Mick Foley had a much bigger impact, and I think at this time, as far as I'm concerned, he had a bigger fan base. But what's weird is, again, this is a guy, at least for me, I think of more during the Attitude Era. But like you said, he did a lot of stuff for the Monday Night Wars too. So for me, it's Mick Foley. It's a pretty easy one.
Okay, so Mick Foley gets the first little nod. Jose?
I'm going to have to go with Mick Foley as well. He has one of the highlight moments of that era, which is the Hell in the Cell match with Taker at King of the Ring and the dive. I mean, that probably has been played to ad nauseum in every kind of highlight video, but he was definitely one of the bigger stars from that era. Jericho got his start in it, but Foley was already established as Mankind, Cactus, Dude Love. And then one of the bigger turning points from that era, too, is the episode where he won the WWF title for the first time, and Nitro gave the spoiler because it was a pre-recorded match. And that turned a lot of viewers over to see it on Raw that night. And that's one of the things that, Tony Schiavone, at the announcer at WCW Nitro at the time, said, oh, they're going to put the title on Mick Foley, who wrestled here as Cactus Jack. That'll put butts in seats. And that just came back to bite him in the ass as the war turned over.
Okay, wow. So Jericho's on the brink of elimination. Drew, your favorite guy might be out soon.
He's been there before. If you'll recall, I guess maybe this isn't from the Monday Night Wars era, but he did manage to defeat both The Rock and Stone Cold in one night. So with help from no one, it was all by himself. But yeah, I mean, if we're talking just Monday Night Wars, what is this, like 96, 97? I was more of a WCW guy. I didn't watch WWF that much back then. But Chris Jericho had a lot of really compelling storylines at this time. He feuded with Bill Goldberg. He was feuding with, Dean Malenko, knowing 4 more holds than him. And, he had
The man of
personal
1,004
security.
holds.
Yeah, he had that. And, these are 2 guys that like to change masks a lot. Literally in Mankind's, Mick Foley's case, because Mankind. Sorry. But Chris Jericho, he had like Top Knot Jericho. He had the Lionheart Jericho, 1,004 holds. You got to mention Ralphus too. I think he was very important in his career, just protecting him from Goldberg and stuff. And as you'll recall, Chris Jericho defeated Goldberg many times, just crushed him. Did his flexing 1-foot pin, and that's all he needed.
I'm pretty sure that was Gilbert.
Who did I say?
Goldberg.
Yeah, it was Goldberg.
Gilbert.
What are you
Who's
saying?
Gilbert?
Gilbert.
I don't know.
So
Right over my
That
head.
was Goldberg.
all right. So your vote is for Chris Jericho.
Yeah. I mean,
Shit,
we all
I-
know who's going to win this.
Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's 2-1, and it's all down to me. You guys do make
Oh,
some.
yeah, you could force a tie.
I could force a tie. You guys do make some pretty compelling cases. For me, though, I do agree with Drew. I think that Chris Jericho was the more significant impact player. He was one of the main holdouts against the NWO. He didn't join the bandwagon. He paved his own path, and he did outstanding work with Dean Malenko, with Eddie Guerrero, with Rey Mysterio, all coming up. All these guys that were young and hungry working together. Mick Foley was diving on tables and like slamming his body into thumbtacks and stuff like that. So I mean, Jericho was hungry and going at it the more athletic, the more purest way, instead of just throwing himself into carnage. So I'm going to force the tie and go Chris Jericho.
All right. So with the tie, we've got a little coin flip here that we'll do, and that'll just make it fair. And instead of continuing the argument, we'll just leave it up to chance. So let's do tails, Chris Jericho, heads, Mick Foley.
Tails never fails, baby.
And
Tails for the top knot.
heads.
Ah,
Suck it, top
Show
knot.
us.
you just made the list.
You
Bang, bang.
stupid idiot.
All right, moving on. The 8 and 9 seed is Sting and Bret Hart. This is a pretty close one for me, actually, because they're almost the same guy.
Pretty much same finisher.
A lot of the same moves, even the reverse DDT. Bret Hart used that quite a bit, and Sting used it as the Scorpion Death Drop. So
Two of my favorites right there too.
yeah, I mean, I liked both of them growing up. For me, I've got to go Bret. I think he was in the main event scene longer, and Sting during this time just stood around a lot.
What?
He just stood around a lot. Like, he stood in the rafters and watched.
Yeah, he was menacing.
That's all he did, though. He didn't
No.
work. He wasn't working. He
He
wasn't.
zip line Danny, bash people with a bat all the time.
After like 12 months of just standing.
You got to build
I
suspense.
don't remember it like that.
Yeah, go back and watch it for $9.99 on the WWE network.
Let me. You guys got a sponsor. That's cool.
I was going to say, did we get sponsored for this episode?
We should, right? They should at least kick us, 9 cents.
Tweet our link or something. Fuck.
Oh, I don't think we deserve that many followers. All that hate mail that we'd get for this episode.
Oh man.
But all right, so I'm gonna go Bret Hart. Let's go with Jose. You can go ahead and follow up, and then Zach and Drew.
It's going to be very close that job, but I'm going to go with Brett too. The thing that puts Brett over Sting for me is because Sting had a great build-up throughout that time. As the Crow character, standing in the rafters, doing sneak attacks. But what killed it was the way they blew it off, especially in that Starrcade match with Hogan, where they tried to recreate the Montreal screw job and it was botched terribly. That just kind of put all that work that they put into building Sting up to just being a botch. Whereas with Brett, he was in it for that start of what would have become the pre-Attitude Era, where you had him, Taker, Shawn, Vader, Sid. All these guys were kind of Stone Cold were kind of blossoming and showing their attitude. And then the screw job happens. Things go off with him and McMahon. And that was like a big spot. So I think he was a bigger player. So I'll give it to Brett.
Okay. Zach, go ahead.
For me, Sting is like one of the only dudes I remember from WCW that I tried to follow. He was a very odd character during that time. You know, the whole, like we said, the whole staring from the rafters and stuff. But I think like just his persona was very intriguing for people, like his makeup and his weirdness. But I mean, Bret Hart is really a well-known character too. It's a hard one for me. So I'll give it to Sting just because he's, for me, a name that I remember distinctly.
If he would have been in the ring more, I think he would have made a bigger impact. I get that it was Mystique and all that stuff, and the build-up was great, but if he would have been in the ring having more meaningful matches, because to me it seemed like he was up in the rafters forever, like all throughout that fucking summer when they were at Disney World and stuff like that. Like he was up in the rafters that whole time.
But I will say this, from being there live, watching it when they went to the United Center, the crowd would just pop when they saw him, when he would, either drop in from the rafter or be in an area of the crowd where he's just staring at him. Like you could feel that energy. So seeing it live, I was like, man, made me a bigger fan of him. But in the long run, the payoff was just not as great.
All right, Drew, it's 2-1. You could lock it up or you could send it home for Brett.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to force the tie this, but I hope I don't come off as too much of a WCW guy, although Bret Hart was in the WCW around this time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was making sure I remember that right. Brandon, you said that Sting wasn't in the ring that much, but I think that might be an artifact of you being more of a Raw watcher at this time. He was in the main event a lot. He was doing tag teams. I don't remember who with.
He was with Luger a lot at the beginning of the NWO invasion when he started growing the hair out.
Yeah, definitely when they were in the Wolf Pack. I think that was their tag team as well.
He was with Luger again in the Wolf Pack. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was kind of the perfect time for this, the Crow Sting to come out. It was a few years after the Crow movie, and was it a shameless cash in on that? Who's to say? But, I mean...
It did launch a second career for Sting in TNA with that same character.
Oh, yeah. The Stinger, like Neon Stinger, I always thought was corny, even when I was like a young kid, and all those colors were cool. I was just kind of like, oh, I don't know about this guy, but coming back into wrestling and not even being a big fan of the Crow or whatever, it was just, I'm experiencing Sting on his own, and wow, who's this guy that this leather jacket and
baseball bat and stuff.
Yeah, he's pointing this bat at guys.
Okay.
When he was off by himself, that was really fun. When he joined the Wolf Pack later, not as fun. The red and black didn't look that cool. More of a maybe they're trying to get. I don't know. Did Phantom Menace come out by then? Did we know who?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if he was going for that or not, but it
He
was
was,
weird.
but he probably wasn't going for it, but that's where he ended up, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and go to the coin and see who goes on. It's wild that our two wild card rounds both went to the coin toss.
All right. I guess let's do heads, Sting.
Tails, Bret Hart.
Yeah. And tails.
All right. Bret Hart moving on and Mick Foley moving on. So let's see. Next on the bracket, we'll have our sixth seed, Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair. And that was one of the great WrestleMania moments whenever those two faced off years later. But during the Monday Night War, they were on completely different channels. So, Drew, why don't you lead us off on this one?
This one's tough. I mean, just because of the constraint of Monday Night Wars, it's like Shawn Michaels was huge at this time. Am I right?
Yeah.
Ric Flair, he was big in WCW at the time. They were using him a lot. I think. I mean, I remember there being periods where he wasn't there, but
the Horsemen were around.
They had the Horsemen coming out, and he was with them, I think, the whole time. He was pretty important.
It was a pretty watered down version of the Horsemen, though, to be honest.
Right. It was Ric Flair. Sometimes they had Chris Benoit. Arn Anderson.
And whenever they had that the Chicago Bears football player McMichael on there.
McMichael.
Yeah.
That was dumb.
I didn't get that. I always called him Steven Seagal, I think. And I didn't know who he was. So I thought he was just some old wrestler. I told my dad, like, hey, look who it is. And I don't know who that was. He didn't recognize him from football, but.
And Jose's a Bears fan, so he's probably a huge McMichael mark.
Oh no!
I remember thinking he was bad even back then.
But, yeah, even back then he was pretty terrible.
All right, but anyway back to HBK and Nature Boy.
It's hard to let anybody get the edge over Ric Flair. I mean, he's like one of the greatest of all time, probably.
I mean, same can be said for both.
Yep.
Sounds like he dropped out.
I think he's back.
Oh,
sorry. What happened? Me?
Yeah, you dropped out for a sec, but you're back.
Sorry.
Go ahead and give us who you think was the best again.
Oh, you didn't hear that? It was Heartbreak Kid.
Heartbreak Kid. Okay.
Sweet chin music on Ric Flair this time. Sorry.
All right. Wow. Jose.
Just like he ended Rick's career at WrestleMania, gotta go with HBK on this one.
Wow.
Again, during the Monday Night Wars, DX was big. Shawn helped bring that about. And again, with him putting Stone Cold unwillingly, but putting Stone Cold over at WrestleMania, again, helped catapult Stone Cold, so he was a bigger player, bigger part during that than Rick was to WCW.
Zach?
Man, I don't know what to do here. I think I agree that during this era, HBK was a huge deal. But I mean, you can't mention Ric Flair's name without giving him all of the credit. That's a tough one.
Well, I mean, you could flip the coin for your choice if you would like.
I'll say HBK as well, because during this era, he was a lot more impactful, I think.
I'm glad you said that, because that takes all the pressure off of me. Because now, no matter what I say, it doesn't matter. Because if I vote for Ric Flair, it gets beat because you three jabronis voted for HBK. If I vote for HBK, then it's unanimous, and we just went 4 horsemen on Ric Flair's ass. And I think that's what we're gonna have to do, because DX started the Monday Night War when they invaded with the fucking tank or whatever it was, the Army Jeep, when they invaded Monday Nitro and they were banging on the door and they called them out, you know? So that started it. They called the first shot, you know? So DX, HBK, they were more important. You're moving on. The next one's going to be another close one, I think. And that's pitting The Undertaker versus Hulk Hogan. So that's a lot. Jose, I saw you kind of pop whenever I said that. So why don't you go ahead and lead us off?
On this one, it's going to be Hogan, the NWO. That heel turn at Bash at the Beach, starting off the NWO, was another big turner there. Taker was very key. He was the backbone to WWF at that time. He was, the reliable guy, the one that he never flipped over from one side to the other, but he was always in the background. Whereas you had Hogan turning heel and then starting the NWO, that's what gave WCW their momentum and led him to that 83-week run in the ratings, beating WWF. So just on that alone, I got to give it to Hogan.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Taker had the Ministry of Darkness, but that's not the same thing. The NWO launched mega factions at the time. That was the original trio just started adding more and more, and then it just went crazy. But the original, like what they call themselves, like the New Blood and fucking like Six Pac when he joined, but then it just started getting crazy when they started letting everybody on the roster on. But It was the same thing as the Undertaker with his ministry. He started getting like Viscera and all that shit. But Hogan's heel turn saved his career. If he would have stayed red and yellow, he would have been done.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. Like when he became Hollywood Hulk Hogan and he was all black and rebellious, that was a big thing for him. I think either way, he would have had a great time during that era, just because he's such a huge personality. But that was a big to do that he was like this different character. So I'm definitely giving it to Hogan as well.
All right, Drew, you want to say anything?
I don't know if there's much more to be said. I mean, as much as remiss as I am to, or as reluctant, I guess, as I am to give it to Hogan, because I was a big mark at the time and I hated him. Like, he was a very effective heel. I despised this man. I don't think his matches were that good at the time, but definitely compared to Undertaker, Hogan was huge at the time. And I think just how much I hated him back then is just a testament to how effective he is, really, and how much charisma he has. But
yeah, I mean,
did get on my nerves. I think they overused him. He came out and talked too much, but I got to give it to him, Hogan.
Yeah, I think it was unanimous. That's probably our first unanimous one. Wow, I thought that'd be a little bit closer.
Yep.
So now we had Mick Foley and Bret Hart move on. So we've got Bret Hart versus The Rock in this round. And this one, I mean, these two, they had some battles in real life that were pretty epic, and they were pretty even. I would be surprised if this ends up unanimous. Other? They might have been. You don't know. But who do you think? Let's see. Who wants to start this one? Anybody have a strong opinion one way or the other?
I think it's really easy to me. I think The Rock takes it.
The Rock? You think Rocky Maivia?
Oh, is that who? Wait, hang on.
No, you're right. Is he
The Rock yet?
It would be Nation of Domination. Rock would be about where he's at this point, I would say.
Oh, okay.
Or is that a little too early?
See, I still just think of him as The Rock. I'm not sure what what he was at this time.
Jose, where in the timeline of Rock would you say that the majority of the Monday Night Wars would kind of get a snapshot of him?
Nation of Domination era, definitely. Because
Mm.
early I was rewatching some of the Rumbles from 97, 98, 99. And by 98, he was already Nation of Domination Rock. And he was having the solid run that he was having as the IC champ.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking.
You know, I think he was Nation of Domination on the N64 game. So
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
That makes it official.
So you got Nation of Domination Rock versus Bret Hart.
Okay. I don't. You guys go ahead. I'm gonna walk
Ponder
mine
on it.
back and think about it a little bit. Let me
All
hear
right.
what you guys got to say.
All right, I'll go ahead because I think I like Bret Hart in this. I was hoping that he would beat Sting so that we could get to this round because I was saving this for the big guns. But I think the pro Canada Bret Hart, when he was the Canadian elitist with Owen, Davey Boy Smith, and they had Brian Pillman in the Hart Foundation, and Jim Neidhart was in there as well, and they were pro Canada, and the pops that they would get whenever Raw would go to Canadian cities, even though they were the heels, they would get such pro crowds that I think that's what prompted WCW to start doing NWO specific pay-per-views, because it was showing that the heels had their own shit going on in their own country. It really made it like nations divided. That was the shit. They had flag on the pole matches and everything. So Bret Hart.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, as far as I remember, I don't think The Rock was a superstar at this point. Am I correct on that?
I mean, he was.
He was ascending.
Yeah, on the rise.
Yeah. He
Gotcha.
was the next big thing, basically.
Yeah.
He was the IC champion. He was the workhorse.
Gotcha. But for me, I think Bret Hart by this point was already a huge star. So Bret definitely gets this for me. But The Rock is an up and coming guy who would, in the next era, be one of the greats. So it's a good one.
So who you going with, Bret?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh-oh. Rocky might be going down.
You know, I think if Chris Jericho didn't win earlier, that's enough precedent for me to give it to Bret Hart on this one. If we're judging not by who they would become, but who they were at the specific moment in time, Bret Hart probably was the bigger guy back then.
I agree. I mean, people put Mick Foley over based off of his entire body of work, didn't they? Huh.
That's a little bit unfair.
What are you?
Funny
You
how that
salty a little
bias
bit?
works. Yeah. Stupid idiots. Jose, who you got? You gonna take the Rock Nation?
I'm going to go with Bret on this one, even though it's, again, another very close one because of that IC run that he had during that era. And look at the time, his gunning parallel with Stone Cold. They were going back and forth for the IC title. Then he had a great run with Ken Shamrock, too. And eventually getting on to the following year, around 98, to the WWF Championship. But then again, you just said it, that Team Canada Hart Foundation was such a great run, because at one point they had all the championships,
Even the European Championship, hardcore,
IC,
everything.
hardcore,
Yep.
everything. And the heat that they would get in the States as opposed to the pops they would get in Canada or even overseas if they went to Europe, it was insane. So yeah, definitely got to go with Bret on this one.
Yeah, that was a good time, and I always liked Bret Hart as a kid, so I loved it whenever he turned heel, and he was a very effective heel to me, and I think that inspired Hogan to want to be a heel or to be a bigger heel, is because Bret was being such a huge heel after he had been wearing like pink tights his entire career. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Was this before or after he went on Mad TV and had that little sketch on there?
The
I
gold
don't
stats we put him
know.
in the sharpshooter.
I
Yeah.
have no clue when that was
Oh,
in
it
the
was
timeline.
funny. It was so funny. You got to look that up. If you haven't seen
Yeah.
it.
So, and then now our number 1 seed, Stone Cold against good old Mick Foley. I think this is probably the easiest decision to make, and we can all just pretty much say Austin 316 is moving on to the next round.
Yep.
Yeah,
Easily.
absolutely.
I mean,
he pretty much was WWF.
he was the rocket ship that took the WWF, then WWE to new heights, and then kept them soaring above for a long, long time.
You know, and it's the 90s. It's a guy that doesn't like his boss, and he gets to punch him and stuff. Like,
He drinks beer at work. He does whatever he wants.
Kicks people in the balls.
Yeah, he was what everybody wanted to do, and Mick Foley was what everybody wanted to do that too. You always wanted to beat up the fat, ugly guy or whatever that's not going to really fight back, but can take a lot of punishment. That was Mick Foley.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Stone Cold is by far a way bigger personality and superstar. I mean, his finisher is one of the best in my opinion. Like you don't get any better than kicking some dude in the nuts and bashing his face over your shoulder.
putting a dirty sock on your
Yeah,
hand,
it's kind of gimmicky if you ask
mandible
me.
claw. That's fun.
It's a little gimmicky.
You want me to bring up who else had a stunner for a finisher? Because I did some research the other day. Disco Inferno. So,
Well, I'm glad you said that because now we've set up our final 4, and before we get to that, I kind of want to talk about some of the honorable mentions that didn't make our list, like the Disco Inferno. There were a lot of guys during this time. Yeah, big surprise that he didn't make the list. But a lot of guys that I saw that people were kind of questioning about after we announced the top 10 was the Outsiders, Hall and Nash.
sure.
They were asking about one guy, Jeff Baker, was asking about Canyon
Give him a
some
whole
for
shout
some
out,
reason.
huh?
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Let's see.
Check him out at wrestling.
Goldberg. Yeah, Jeff Baker. He's a wrestler. Check him out. Book him. Pay him. Get him good money. DDP didn't get a mention. Macho Man. Kurt Angle. So these guys, they put in a lot of work, and Eddie Guerrero was huge during this time as building up his career and building and carrying the cruiserweight division of WCW.
You know, I mentioned I was a mark at the time, but Eddie Guerrero, even as a heel, I still liked him. I was moved by his talent, I guess.
Yeah, he was fantastic. The way that he would snap suplexes and the height that he got on his frog splash and his mullet, it was just really awesome.
Really fun to watch.
Yeah, he was fantastic. Rey Mysterio and people like that. But other than those guys, who did you guys want to mention just briefly?
Goldberg is definitely one that should have made the list. He's giant. I mean, with his I don't remember what he called it, but where he just would slam you to the fucking center of the earth.
Spear and the jackhammer.
Yeah.
Jackhammer.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he was arguably the biggest star WCW made.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. You could say with Hogan, Nash, all the Outsiders, they all came in with notoriety and whatnot. But Goldberg, they built him from the ground up, and they did it slowly.
Goldberg and Sting were like the WCW products, and DDP.
DDP too.
Drew, do you want to take your honorable mention to mention that Chris Jericho should have been moving on?
I mean, I've already talked about Jericho enough. I think I could just defend him for a whole other episode. But I already mentioned Disco Inferno. Alex Wright was a funny thing back at that time.
That's Wonder Kid.
You know, he's just a German guy that dances. Like, that was pretty much his whole gimmick. They didn't have, enough dancing. They had to have Disco Inferno, too. I don't know, maybe he was a good wrestler. I don't really remember
Oh,
him.
speaking of dancing, the Nitro Girls. Everybody
Yeah,
loved
I'd
them.
forgotten all about that. Harlem Heat. If we do a tag team tournament sometime,
Oh,
I
that might
really
be
liked
fun.
them. Those guys were huge and like jumped really high, despite their how big they were. It was a lot of fun to watch that. Steiner Brothers.
Okay, we could mention hundreds, I'm sure, but let's move on. We don't just want to mention
Sorry.
the entire roster. So let's move on to the final four. And in the first matchup, let's go ahead and pit Hulk Hogan versus Stone Cold. That's pretty heavy. That's two major industry icons and icons of that particular era.
Two goats.
Horns. Yeah, two goats.
Yeah.
Ooh. Jose, why don't you go ahead and tackle this one first and let the rest of us kind of marinate on it.
I'm going to stay with Stone Cold on this one. Stone Cold, again, was the guy that they strapped the Rock to, and he took the whole company up. Whereas with Hogan, he made a big impact, but in the long run, his impact brought down WCW. Not just on camera, but the behind-the-scenes stuff, too, with the backstage politics is what ultimately led to bad booking decisions, certain people being held down, and not being allowed to be put over. So just on that alone, I got to go with Stone Cold on that.
Okay. I think I'm gonna go ahead and say I think Hogan was the bigger impact and the more important role player because his heel turn was the main event of WCW, and it launched Nitro into a war. It made it to where it was even feasible for WCW to rival WWF at the time. Stone Cold was great. They strapped the rocket on him. He was through the moon. But during that time, they also had so many other guys that they could have strapped the rocket on, and they could have taken off and carried the company. WCW didn't really have any other guys. They were a one-trick pony with Hogan, and that's why they ultimately failed, because all of their other stars weren't big enough. They weren't a big enough draw. WWF had more draws at the time.
It's an interesting point.
I figured everybody else is going to go Stone Cold, so I wanted to give the counterpoint and give you guys a little bit of something to think about.
Yeah.
Well, it's true to what you said, because WWF not only had Stone Cold at the time, Rock was coming up and building up. Like I said, they had Taker as the backbone during that time. HBK, and then eventually Triple H in the 99-2000 towards the end of it, when he started breaking out solo. So if one was off, you could always plug one of the other guys in.
And to that point, Stone Cold just up and quit for a while. He just up and walked out and then came back. And then he was injured for a while when he broke his neck. So the company survived without him. So to me, it's Hogan. Drew?
I'm going to have to go with Hogan, too. I'm not trying to lick Brandon's boots or anything here. But for me, anyway, like Hogan kind of got me to watch wrestling again. At that time, I hadn't really been watching it much, and it just the way that it transformed WCW. I wouldn't have probably gotten back into it if that hadn't been going on. So he was huge for me. I can't really look at this one objectively. Like to me, he was the bald, the superior bald flagship character.
That's Skullet.
Yeah. Geez.
Okay, Zach, it's on you, man.
Those are really good points about Hogan. Stone Cold is my number one here, so I'm just gonna leave it up to chance. You could make a case for either guy.
You can.
They're both in the talks for GOAT of all time. So this is a tough one. You're probably right about the impact because WCW didn't really have shit else going for it. But just to make it interesting, I'll leave it to chance. And
So your official vote will be for Stone Cold, and you're going to leave
Yes.
it up to the coin. Okay.
yes, why don't you pick the person and the side of the coin?
Well, since Hogan had a little bit of a mullet, we'll give him tails, and since Austin was just straight bald, we'll give him heads.
Fair.
That's very fair. Okay, here we go. Heads.
Oh, boo!
Steve
All right,
Austin
but
goes.
I can't be mad because Stone Cold was the flagship or the flag bearer of the WWF at the time.
We're gonna spray paint a black NWO across that bald head later.
I feel you.
The smoking skull belt.
And in the other bracket, we have The Rock versus Shawn Michaels. So talked about goats on the other side. I mean, this is another conversation of goats right here. HBK and The Rock. Oof. I mean, it's got to be HBK. My opinion, it has to be HBK because DX launched the revolution. They had a badass song and music video that went with their song. And if you had epilepsy, you'd probably freak out every time they came to the ring. They had fucking crazy merchandise. They were the coolest. They got us all in trouble for pointing to our crotches every day at school, telling everybody at school to suck it. Like
They were disrespectful.
Like there was something wrong with us doing that. There wasn't. There isn't today anything wrong with me telling somebody to suck.
They had a cool gesture that you could do to like other people. And
yeah. It was perfect.
You know,
it was perfect.
Still do it to this day.
Yeah, I mean, suck it.
Like somebody might recognize the people's eyebrow, but I don't think that had been invented yet.
I mean, it wasn't even that cool. Only
based on what I said about The Rock at this time period earlier, if we've established that he's in the nation,
he's the nation of domination.
This
Rock.
is
I think
Shawn Michaels. This is DX. Shawn Michaels. It's him, man.
It's got to be. All right, that's two.
I agree with that.
2, 3.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
Easy.
unanimous. Wow.
Sweet chin music right on the button.
Yep. The only question is, do you suck it straight on or do you cross them?
You cross them. You cross them.
Yeah, you got to cross them.
The straight on is for like if you're standing behind somebody and you're doing like a one-handed.
Right.
Yeah. Now, before we get
they've got to be doing the cross.
Before we get to the finals, I want to know who was better, 6-Pac or X-Pac?
X-Pac.
Yeah, X-Pac.
Yeah.
I don't remember 6-Pac
I don't either.
very much, even though that was the show that I watched.
He was
from
and
I don't remember him very much.
He was cruiserweight champion for a while. He had a few matches with like Eddie and Rey Mysterio, and
yeah,
he had one great ladder match.
I know he was there, but he doesn't stand out in my memory. Even not watching WWF mainly, X-Pac was like.
Anybody remember
a huge character, and he had that video that time.
Huh? Yeah, because even X-Pac's theme was a variation of the DX theme, but even then, that's still jammed. You would get hyped when you hear it come on. He had more energy as X-Pac than he did as Six.
Yeah, you're right.
This was also a big time for Rage Against the Machine, and that song sounded like them. So,
it did kind of sound like
that.
Yeah, it did.
All right, so in the finals, we have the man that launched the New World Order. No, he lost. We have Stone Cold. I tried to sneak him in. Fuck. We have Stone Cold, the WWF champion, Smoking Skull belt, against Shawn Michaels, the benefactor of the Montreal Screwjob, the leader of DX, and another one of the people that really carried the flag for the WWF during this time.
Rematch from WrestleMania 14.
Yeah, we talked about that, and it's pretty crazy that it boiled down to these two. Zach, why don't you go ahead and lead the way on this one and let us know what you're thinking?
This is rough. Like I said, Stone Cold is my pick, but if there's one guy other than Hulk that you could say is more impactful during this time, it's definitely Shawn Michaels. Like we've been saying this whole time, DX is huge. I think Stone Cold probably has a bigger like worldwide fan base per se because he's very noteworthy in like his submission and his just crazy attitude. People know him for that. But I think if you were a true wrestling fan, you'd probably appreciate what Shawn Michaels has done more. I hate to take it away from Stone Cold, but I think I'm going to say Shawn Michaels because as a kid, DX was like the it stable. I mean, it was a huge thing. And like we've said, everyone did the suck it. His chin music is crazy. So yeah, it's Shawn Michaels for me. I hate to do it, but you got to.
All right, that's one for Sean. Drew, you wanna weigh in?
Not yet, please. No, I can right now, but I haven't really made up my mind, so I feel like I'm gonna ramble a little bit while I try to work it out.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and go.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
I'm gonna also go with Shawn Michaels. For me, yeah, Stone Cold was badass. Yeah, he went in and he kicked Vince's ass all the time, and it was entertaining TV. But Shawn was the showman, Mr. WrestleMania, they call him. He was the athletic. He was the one that popularized the nip up. He was lasting 60 plus minutes in Royal Rumbles. He was doing all this stuff that like he was such an active participant in the ring. And Stone Cold had knee braces and, you know, all that shit. Like he wasn't the top of his game, even whenever he was, or top of his game physically. I mean, even whenever he was, you know, winning the King of the Ring. So for that, I've got to give it to HBK. Just the athleticism and the ability to go even after major injuries.
You know, these are two guys that both had a big story about beating up their boss, and that's always fun to see. Anybody beating up their boss, I support, I think. Don't tell anybody where I work or anything. Don't want this to come back to me. My boss would kick my ass. But I think I got to give it to Heartbreak Kid, too. Just based on his ring style, I think he's more exciting to watch to me. He's got that. Unfortunately, I hate to give this much credit to a hair haver as a hair loser currently right now myself. But man, those flowing locks, he like when he whips those things back, getting up or selling a kick with it or something. It's just he's so fun to watch in the ring.
Yeah,
the athleticism you mentioned and just his style is really electrifying, to steal a word from probably a announcer. I don't know, JR or something.
So that's already 3 votes for HBK. So he is automatically our winner. But Jose, do you want to say anything in defense of Stone Cold as to why you think he should have won?
I think my pick was going to be Stone Cold, but very close. But because the payout of him, he paid out more in dividends, his character, his run, than Shawn. And that's only because Shawn got injured and had to retire. The DX run, the DX era was great. It was par with Stone Cold. They kind of had the similar thing going, beat up your boss, because, everything that the working person wanted to do.
Stone Cold, I think appealed more towards the working man, and DX appealed more to the teenager in us all.
Sure.
That's a good point.
True, but I think the payout with Stone Cold was more because they again went up with him. If the back injury hadn't happened, then probably Shawn takes all around because he would have had another run. And you could look at his career in two parts, pre the back injury and then post, and his entire body of work definitely, like you said, outshines Stone Cold's body of work because of the more high caliber matches, moments and things like that. But I would have given it to Stone Cold just based on the payout.
Do you think it would have helped Stone Cold to have a huge, well-known stable like Shawn Michaels had?
No,
No.
not with that character.
Stone Cold was great on his own.
A stable would have wanted
Rattlesnake,
him
man.
down.
Rattlesnakes don't have friends.
When they
far as I know.
tried to do the corporate Stone Cold and all that stuff, it
Right.
it just got kind of gimmicky and silly later on.
Can't believe that, man.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
weird. But anyway, that's our tournament. Shawn Michaels is our winner, 3-1 in the finals over Stone Cold. So that kind of shocked me. I didn't think it was going to turn out that way, but it did. That's kind of cool. Guys, I appreciate you guys coming on. We'll have you back on maybe for a tag team tournament sometime.
Love
Yeah,
it.
heck
Love
yeah,
the idea.
that was a huge shocker to the conclusion. I definitely did not think Shawn Michaels would make it.
No, I didn't either. Oh well.
Get that good seed. It can take you far sometimes.
Sure. What seed did he start in again?
He was the 6th seed. So, all right, guys. Thanks for coming
The
on.
best one possible.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. See ya.